The Unsolved Murder of Fiona Yu. On August 4, 1997, in the scorching heat of Tempe, Arizona, a tragedy unfolded that would leave a community shaken and a case unsolved for decades. This is the story of Fiona Yu, a young woman whose life was cut short in a brutal attack that continues to baffle investigators to this day. The day of the murder. It was a typical August afternoon in Tempe, with temperatures soaring well above 100 degrees Fahrenheit. The campus of Arizona State University, ASU, was relatively quiet, as it often is during the summer months. At around 5:10 p.m., Kazu Ito, a student worker, finished her shift at the campus library and began her short bike ride home to the apartment she shared with her roommate, Fiona Yu. Kazu arrived at their apartment at approximately 5:20 p.m. Upon entering, she noticed signs that Fiona had already returned from work. Her bike and backpack were present. However, Kazu didn't immediately see Fiona, which wasn't unusual given their two-level apartment layout. Assuming Fiona might be upstairs, or perhaps checking their mail at the community mailboxes a short walk away, Kazu thought nothing of it and went about her evening routine. As Kazu began preparing dinner in their small kitchen, the phone rang at around 6:00 p.m. It was her boyfriend, Tony. They chatted for a few minutes as Kazu moved around the apartment. But when she hung up and returned to the kitchen, an eerie feeling suddenly came over her. It was a full-body chill, the kind of instinctive reaction that some refer to as the gift of fear, a primal warning system alerting us to potential danger. In that moment, Kazu realized she still hadn't seen or heard from Fiona. Given that Fiona hadn't come through either the front or back door while Kazu had been home, she deduced that Fiona must be upstairs. With an increasing sense of unease, Kazu climbed the stairs to the second floor. What she found there would change her life forever. Fiona Yu lay motionless on the landing, clearly the victim of a vicious attack. There was blood visible, and Fiona's clothing had been disturbed, her shirt removed and pants lowered, indicating a sexual assault. Despite the horrific scene, Kazu realized that Fiona was still alive. Pushing aside her shock and fear, she immediately called for help. The initial investigation police and emergency services arrived quickly on the scene. As EMTs rushed Fiona to the hospital, investigators began the painstaking process of examining the crime scene. They found no signs of forced entry, suggesting that either Fiona had let her attacker in or the perpetrator had found another way to gain access to the apartment. One of the first pieces of evidence that would prove crucial was the discovery of bloodstains on Fiona that did not belong to her. This biological evidence from the attacker would become a cornerstone of the investigation, offering the potential to identify the killer through DNA analysis. Tragically, despite the efforts of medical professionals, Fiona Yu succumbed to her injuries shortly after arriving at the hospital. The exact nature and extent of her injuries were not fully disclosed in initial reports, but it was later revealed that while she had suffered severe head trauma, her ultimate cause of death was strangulation. As detectives began piecing together the timeline of events, they established that Fiona had likely arrived home from her campus job between 4:00 and 4:30 p.m. A neighbor reported seeing her on her bike ride home. By 5:00 or 5:10 p.m., Fiona had apparently dropped off her bike and backpack at the apartment and gone to check the mail, as someone witnessed her walking back to her apartment, mail in hand, and entering through the rear sliding door. This timeline presented a chilling scenario. The attack on Fiona had occurred in a very narrow window of time, possibly as little as 15 minutes. This led investigators to consider the possibility that the attacker had been lying in wait for Fiona, perhaps even inside the apartment before she returned home. Early theories and suspects. Initially, police entertained the idea that Fiona might have interrupted a burglary in progress. However, this theory was quickly discarded as it failed to align with the evidence and the timeline of events. The focus then shifted to those in Fiona's immediate circle. The first person of interest was Fiona's ex-boyfriend, Mark. They had recently ended their long-term relationship, providing a potential motive for a crime of passion. However, when police sought to question Mark, they discovered he was in New York with his family. While this didn't immediately rule him out, investigators considered the possibility that he could have committed the crime and quickly flown to New York to establish an alibi. Mark was eventually cleared when his DNA sample did not match the biological evidence found at the scene. As the investigation progressed, detectives cast a wider net, looking into friends, acquaintances, and individuals living in close proximity to Fiona. They collected DNA samples from numerous people, including a man known to have a crush on Fiona, a resident of the apartment complex who had previously had an altercation with Kazu's boyfriend, Tony, a maintenance man who came forward as a witness, claiming to have seen a 6-foot-tall black man leaving Fiona's apartment on the day of the murder. Interestingly, when providing his statement, the maintenance man made some unsettling comments about Fiona's appearance, referring to her as a cutie and making remarks about wanting one, presumably referring to Asian women. Despite these red flags, his DNA did not match the sample from the crime scene. In fact, as the investigation continued, person after person was eliminated as a suspect through DNA testing. This pattern of elimination led investigators to consider a troubling alternative. Perhaps Fiona's killer was not someone she knew, but a random predator. The new boyfriend. During the early stages of the investigation, an intriguing lead emerged. Kazu's boyfriend, Tony, informed investigators about a new man in Fiona's life, someone she had met just 2 weeks before her death. The information about this individual was limited, but what little was known painted a concerning picture. According to Tony's statement to the Arizona Republic, this new acquaintance worked at a topless bar in Phoenix. Tony expressed reservations about the man, describing him as someone who didn't look like the type of guy for her. He went on to say, he just looked like a bully sort of guy. He looked like he could manipulate Fiona. Police were keen to locate and question this individual, not necessarily as a suspect, but to see if he could provide any information that might help the investigation. However, it's unclear from available reports whether they ever managed to identify or locate this man. His potential role in the case remains one of many unanswered questions. A campus in fear, the September attacks. As the investigation into Fiona's murder continued without a breakthrough, the ASU campus and surrounding community were rocked by 2 more violent incidents in September 1997, just over a month after Fiona's death. The first attack occurred on September 15th. A young woman was assaulted in her off-campus apartment by an intruder who gained entry through an unlocked door. The attacker beat her severely, attempted to strangle her with one of her own shirts, and sexually assaulted her. In a chilling detail, he demanded to know the names of her friends whose pictures were displayed in her apartment. The assault lasted for an extended period, with the victim losing consciousness multiple times. The attacker also robbed her of $10 before leaving. The victim's account of the ordeal, as reported by journalist Judy Villa, is harrowing. The attacker told her, "Dead people don't breathe," to which she defiantly responded, "I'm not dead at all." He then struck her again. Before leaving, he slashed her with scissors on her knees, breasts, and neck. Left alone and badly injured, the young woman fought to stay conscious, reciting the alphabet and singing to herself to avoid falling asleep, fearing she might never wake up. Incredibly, just 1 day later, another attack took place. This time, the victim was in her dorm room when she heard a noise at her door. Looking through the peephole, she saw two young men who appeared to be around her age. Assuming they were fellow students, she opened the door. The men forced their way in, strangled her until she lost consciousness, and sexually assaulted her. As she regained consciousness, she heard one of them say, "She's not dead yet, sign." Before leaving, they robbed her of her wallet, checkbook, and gym bag. The similarities between these two attacks and Fiona's murder were striking. All three incidents involved strangulation and severe beating, particularly to the face. What? However, there were also notable differences, particularly the element of robbery in the September attacks, which hadn't been a factor in Fiona's case. The hunt for a serial predator. These brutal assaults sent shockwaves through the ASU community and intensified the pressure on law enforcement to identify and apprehend the perpetrator or perpetrators. The Tempe Police Department and ASU Department of Public Safety worked closely together, comparing notes and looking for connections between the cases. One potential link emerged quickly. The maintenance man who had come forward as a witness in Fiona's case had described seeing a 6-foot-tall black man leaving her apartment. A similar description was given for the attacker in the September assaults. Acting on a tip that came in just days after the September attacks, investigators turned their attention to a local Tempe high school student. Using a yearbook to narrow down their search, they identified Lee Comie Jr. as a person of interest. Qait. The two survivors of the September attacks picked Lee out of a photo lineup, leading to his arrest. How? Further investigation led to the identification of Lee's accomplice in the dorm room attack, another high school student named Derek Wood. How? Incriminating evidence was found in Lee's home, including items stolen from the dorm room victim. How? Combined with witness testimony and statements made by Lee himself, it seemed that the September attacks had been solved. However, when Lee and Derek's DNA was tested against the sample from Fiona's case, neither was a match. This development left investigators with a perplexing question. Were there multiple predators operating in the area, or was there some other explanation for the similarities between the cases? Despite the DNA evidence ruling out Lee and Derek, police were initially hesitant to completely eliminate them as persons of interest in Fiona's case. Bash. Tempe Police Sergeant Toby Diaz was quoted as saying, "That's just one piece of evidence. We don't want to rule him, Comie, out yet as a suspect. We'll continue to work the case and look at the evidence and see where it takes us." This reluctance to clear Lee entirely led to speculation about the possibility of an unknown accomplice in Fiona's case. If Lee had worked with Derek in one attack, could he have had a different partner for Fiona's murder? However, Lee denied any involvement in Fiona's case and did not provide any information about potential accomplices. As time passed and Lee went to trial for the September attacks in 1998, media coverage began to disconnect him from Fiona's case. Later reports simply stated that both Lee and Derek had been cleared in relation to Fiona's murder, though it's unclear whether this represented an official stance from law enforcement or was a simplification by the media. The Asian women stalker. As if the community hadn't been traumatized enough, yet another predator emerged in late 1997, specifically targeting Asian women near the ASU campus. The first incident was reported in December 1997, 4 months after Fiona's murder. However, it wasn't until 2 incidents occurred close together in late March 1998 that police connected the dots and realized they were dealing with a serial offender. Initially, 5 victims were known, but as police urged more women to come forward, overcoming various cultural and social barriers to reporting, the number grew to 8. The attacker's modus operandi was consistent: He would drive alongside women who were walking or jogging, ask for directions, or make explicit sexual propositions, and then claim to have a gun, threatening the women to get into his car. Fortunately, in the known cases, all of the women managed to flee without being physically harmed. However, law enforcement was deeply concerned about the potential for this behavior to escalate into more violent attacks. In mid-April 1998, police arrested a suspect named Thomas Floyd Phelps. Chillingly, Phelps claimed that the true number of his victims was closer to 20, though this was never confirmed. Despite the arrest, there are frustrating gaps in the publicly available information about this case. It's unclear what sentence, if any, Phelps received, and his name disappears from newspaper reports shortly after his arrest. While Phelps's actions were deeply troubling, investigators did not seem to consider him a likely suspect in Fiona's murder. His modus operandi was significantly different from the attack on Fiona, and his known crimes began after her death. Additionally, there's no indication that his DNA was ever compared to the sample from Fiona's case, though it seems likely that such a comparison would have been made given the proximity of the crimes in both time and location. A pattern of predatory behavior. The series of attacks on and around the ASU campus in 1997 and 1998 paints a disturbing picture of a community plagued by sexual predators. However, these were not isolated incidents. The broader Phoenix metropolitan area experienced several other sexual assaults during this period that initially went unsolved. 2 sexual assaults occurred in Chandler, Arizona, just south of Tempe, in 1997. These cases went cold until a CODIS, Combined DNA Index System, hit in 2019 finally identified a suspect. Between December 1996 and December 1997, there were 2 attempted sexual assaults and 1 completed assault in the Phoenix area. 2 of these incidents were linked by evidence, but this connection wasn't confirmed until 2011. Importantly, none of these cases were linked to Fiona's murder. However, they underscore the prevalence of sexual violence in the area during this time period and highlight the challenges faced by law enforcement in solving these crimes. The fact that so many of these other cases were eventually solved, some through DNA evidence, makes the continued mystery surrounding Fiona's murder all the more frustrating. Despite the presence of DNA evidence from her attacker, no match has ever been found in any database, nor has it been linked to any other crime. Years of silence. As the 1990s gave way to the 2000s, Fiona Yu's case grew colder. Year after year passed with little to no movement in the investigation. Periodically, investigators would dust off her files, bringing in fresh eyes to review the evidence. At one point, a well-known profiler was brought in to assess the case, but nothing seemed to move the investigation forward significantly. The lack of progress was not for lack of effort or resources. DNA technology continued to advance, and investigators presumably re-examined the biological evidence as new techniques became available. However, without a match in any database or a new lead to pursue, the case remained frustratingly unsolved. During this time, the memory of Fiona Yu and the threat that her unknown killer posed to the community began to fade from public consciousness. Media coverage dwindled, and for many, Fiona's story became just another tragic cold case in a world full of unsolved mysteries. A New Hope, DNA phenotyping. In 2017, 20 years after Fiona's murder, a breakthrough in DNA technology offered a new avenue for investigation. Parabon Nanolabs, a company specializing in DNA phenotyping, had developed a technique to predict physical characteristics from DNA evidence. This process, known as snapshot DNA phenotyping, can provide investigators with information about an unknown subject's ancestry, eye color, hair color, skin color, freckling, and face shape. The Tempe Police Department engaged Parabon Services to analyze the DNA sample from Fiona's case. The results provided a startling new perspective on the potential identity of her killer. According to the analysis, investigators were now looking for a Hispanic male, approximately 45 years old, as of 2017, light brown skin, brown eyes, black hair. Parabon also produced a digital composite image based on these predicted characteristics, giving a face to the nameless killer for the first time in 2 decades. This new information presented both opportunities and challenges for the investigation. On one hand, it provided a much more specific description of the suspect than had ever been available before. On the other hand, it seemed to contradict some earlier evidence in the case, particularly the maintenance man's report of seeing a 6-foot-tall black man leaving Fiona's apartment on the day of the murder. The discrepancy raised new questions. Was the maintenance man's report inaccurate? Was he describing a different person entirely? Or could there have been multiple individuals involved in Fiona's murder? Adding to the intrigue, the press release announcing the phenotyping results included a puzzling detail. It stated that the digital composite matched a similar description given during another sexual assault incident that occurred within a few days and in close proximity to Fiona's murder. The police believed these 2 incidents might have been committed by the same suspect. This revelation was surprising, as no such incident had been prominently featured in earlier reporting on Fiona's case. It raised questions about whether there were other attacks that had not been publicly linked to Fiona's murder, and if so, why this connection hadn't been made earlier. A possible connection. The mention of another sexual assault case potentially linked to Fiona's murder led to a search for information about attacks that occurred around the same time. One incident that stood out occurred in late July 1997 in Tucson, Arizona, about an hour and a half away from Tempe. In this case, a woman in her late 30s was out jogging when she was approached by a teenager on a bicycle. Book. The encounter quickly turned violent, with the young man attacking the woman, Ma. She managed to defend herself, striking her attacker in the head with a rock, but he was able to flee on his bicycle. On August 2, 1997, just days before Fiona's murder, the Arizona Daily Star published a description of the Tucson attacker. The assailant is Hispanic, about 5 feet 3 inches tall, and about 120 pounds. He had very short black hair and wore a blue bandana and khaki pants with a web belt. He rode a silver-colored low-ride-style bicycle with high handlebars, Ray. While there are some similarities in the physical description to the phenotype snapshot from Fiona's case, particularly the Hispanic ethnicity and black hair, there are also significant differences. The Tucson attacker was described as much shorter and lighter than would be expected for an adult male, and there was no mention of a bicycle in Fiona's case. Moreover, it's unclear whether this Tucson case is the one referenced in the 2017 press release about Fiona's case. The physical proximity, an hour-and-a-half drive, doesn't seem to match the close proximity mentioned in the release. However, given the limited information available, it's impossible to rule out a connection entirely. The Tucson case took an interesting turn when police arrested a suspect based on the description. However, the young man was later released when his blood did not match blood found on the victim, presumably from when she struck her attacker with the rock. This unidentified blood sample presents another potential avenue for investigation. If it were compared to the DNA from Fiona's case, it could potentially link or eliminate a connection between the 2 attacks. However, it's unclear whether such a comparison was ever made. The challenges of interjurisdictional cooperation, backlogs in DNA processing, and the fact that neither sample had a match in CODIS might have prevented such a comparison from being prioritized. So, unanswered questions. The release of the phenotype snapshot in 2017 reignited interest in Fiona's case, but it also raised new questions. How does the new description of the suspect as Hispanic reconcile with the maintenance man's report of seeing a black man leaving Fiona's apartment. If there was indeed another sexual assault case closely linked to Fiona's murder, why wasn't this connection made public earlier? Were there other unsolved attacks in the area that might be connected to Fiona's case? How reliable is the age estimate provided in the phenotype snapshot, given that DNA analysis cannot directly determine a person's age? Has the DNA evidence been compared to samples from other unsolved cases in the region? Unfortunately, since the 2017 press release, there have been no public updates on Fiona's case. The trail, once again, seems to have gone cold. The promise of genetic genealogy. While the phenotype snapshot didn't immediately lead to a breakthrough in the case, it did demonstrate the potential of advanced DNA analysis techniques. This naturally leads to the question, has genetic genealogy been considered as a tool in Fiona's case? Genetic genealogy has emerged as a powerful technique for solving cold cases in recent years. By comparing DNA evidence to large databases of genetic information from genealogy websites, investigators can potentially identify relatives of an unknown suspect, ultimately narrowing down their search to a specific individual or family. This technique has led to breakthroughs in numerous high-profile cold cases, including the identification of the Golden State Killer in 2018. Given that Parabon Nanolabs, the company that produced the phenotype snapshot for Fiona's case, also offers genetic genealogy services, it seems likely that this avenue has at least been considered by investigators. However, genetic genealogy investigations can be complex, time-consuming, and expensive. They often require additional DNA testing to generate the type of genetic profile needed for comparison to genealogical databases. Additionally, there are ethical considerations around privacy and the use of DNA information from individuals who may not have consented to law enforcement access. Despite these challenges, genetic genealogy represents one of the most promising tools available for solving cold cases like Fiona's. If it hasn't already been attempted, it could potentially provide the breakthrough that has eluded investigators for over 2 decades. The importance of public engagement. One of the key factors in solving cold cases is maintaining public awareness and engagement. While law enforcement continues to work on unsolved cases behind the scenes, public interest can often provide the crucial tip or piece of information that breaks a case wide open. In Fiona's case, there are several ways the public could potentially help. DNA databases. Individuals who have done consumer DNA tests through services like 23andMe, Ancestry DNA, etc., can upload their results to public databases like GED Match and Opt-in to allow their information to be used in law enforcement investigations. The more people who do this, the greater the chance of finding a genetic link to unidentified DNA samples from crime scenes. Information sharing. People who lived in the Tempe area in 1997 might have information they don't realize is relevant. Renewed media coverage and public appeals can jog memories and encourage people to come forward with potentially crucial details. Awareness of unsolved cases. Keeping Fiona's story in the public consciousness increases the likelihood that someone might recognize the description or composite image of the suspect. Pressure for continued investigation. Public interest can encourage law enforcement agencies and policymakers to allocate resources to cold cases and pursue new investigative techniques. The legacy of Fiona Yu. As the years have passed, Fiona Yu's murder has become more than just an unsolved crime. It represents a tragic loss of potential, a young life cut short in a senseless act of violence. Fiona was described by those who knew her as kind and studious, a young woman with a bright future ahead of her. Her case also serves as a stark reminder of the vulnerability of young women, particularly on college campuses. The series of attacks that occurred at ASU in the late 1990s highlighted the need for improved security measures and greater awareness of personal safety. 2. Moreover, Fiona's case underscores the importance of advances in forensic science and the potential for new technologies to shed light on long unsolved crimes. The progression from traditional DNA analysis to phenotype prediction and potentially to genetic genealogy demonstrates how evolving scientific techniques can offer new hope in cold cases. For the investigators who have worked on Fiona's case over the years, it remains an open wound, a challenge that has thus far eluded their best efforts. Each new lead, each advance in technology, offers the tantalizing possibility of finally bringing closure to this decades-old mystery. For Fiona's family and friends, the lack of resolution must be a constant source of pain. The knowledge that her killer has never been brought to justice, that they might still be out there, is a burden they've carried for over 2 decades. The broader context, campus safety and cold case investigations. Fiona Yu's murder and the series of attacks that followed it occurred against a backdrop of growing concern about campus safety across the United States. The 1990s saw increased attention to issues of sexual assault and violence against women on college campuses, leading to initiatives like the Jean Clary Disclosure of Campus Security Policy and Campus Crime Statistics Act, which requires colleges and universities to report crime statistics and security information. The challenges faced in solving Fiona's case also highlight broader issues in cold case investigations. Resource allocation. Cold cases often compete for limited investigative resources with new, active cases. Maintaining momentum on decades-old cases can be challenging for law enforcement agencies. Technological advances. As Fiona's case demonstrates, advancements in forensic technology can breathe new life into cold cases. However, these new techniques often come with their own challenges, including cost, training requirements, and legal and ethical considerations. Interagency cooperation. Cold cases that span multiple jurisdictions or time periods require effective cooperation between different law enforcement agencies. Ensuring that information and evidence are shared effectively can be crucial to solving these cases. Preservation of evidence. The importance of properly collecting and preserving evidence is magnified in cold cases, where that evidence might need to be re-examined decades later using techniques that didn't exist at the time of the crime. Public engagement. Maintaining public interest in cold cases can be challenging, but is often crucial to generating new leads or encouraging witnesses to come forward. The future of the investigation. As of 2024, Fiona Yu's murder remains unsolved. However, the case is not closed, and hope remains that advances in forensic science, particularly in the field of genetic genealogy, could finally provide the breakthrough needed to identify her killer. Several potential avenues for further investigation exist. Genetic genealogy. If not already attempted, a full genetic genealogy investigation could potentially identify relatives of the killer, narrowing down the suspect pool. Re-examination of evidence. With advances in forensic technology, it may be worthwhile to re-examine physical evidence from the crime scene using the latest techniques. Even items that may not have yielded useful information in the past could potentially provide new clues with modern methods. Review of similar cases. A comprehensive review of other unsolved attacks in the region during the late 1990s could potentially reveal connections that were previously overlooked. This includes a thorough comparison of DNA evidence from these cases. Public appeals. Renewed public appeals for information, possibly coupled with the release of new details or the phenotype composite image, could generate fresh leads. Cold Case Unit Review. Many law enforcement agencies have specialized cold case units. A fresh review by such a team, bringing new perspectives and expertise, could uncover overlooked clues or suggest new investigative strategies. Collaboration with academic or private forensic experts. Partnering with universities or private forensic companies could provide access to cutting-edge techniques and fresh analytical approaches. Investigation of the new boyfriend. If not already thoroughly pursued, a renewed effort to identify and investigate the man Fiona had reportedly begun seeing shortly before her death could yield new information. Re-interview of witnesses. People's memories and perspectives can change over time. Re-interviewing key witnesses, including those who were cleared as suspects, might reveal new details or inconsistencies. The role of media and true crime interest. In recent years, there has been a surge of public interest in true crime stories, fueled by popular podcasts, documentaries, and streaming series. While this trend has been criticized by some as exploitative, it has also had tangible benefits for cold case investigations. Media coverage of unsolved crimes can generate new leads by reaching a wide audience, put pressure on law enforcement agencies to allocate resources to cold cases, attract the attention of skilled amateur sleuths who might notice overlooked details, encourage witnesses or individuals with relevant information to come forward, raise funds for additional forensic testing or investigation. For a case like Fiona Yu's, which has received limited media attention in recent years, renewed coverage could potentially make a significant difference. A well-produced podcast series or documentary could reignite public interest in the case, potentially leading to new information coming to light. So, the ethical considerations of cold case investigations. As investigations into cold cases like Fiona Yu's continue, it's important to consider the ethical implications of various investigative techniques, particularly those involving DNA analysis and genetic information. The use of genetic genealogy in criminal investigations has raised privacy concerns. When individuals submit their DNA to genealogy websites, they're often doing so to learn about their family history or health predispositions, not to assist in criminal investigations. The use of these databases by law enforcement, even when legal, raises questions about informed consent and the potential for genetic surveillance. Additionally, the creation and use of DNA phenotype predictions, like the one generated for Fiona's case, has been criticized by some as potentially reinforcing racial stereotypes or leading to racial profiling. The accuracy and reliability of these predictions, particularly for traits like age, have also been questioned. Balancing these ethical concerns with the imperative to solve violent crimes and provide justice for victims is an ongoing challenge for law enforcement agencies, policymakers, and society as a whole. The impact on the community. The unsolved nature of Fiona Yu's murder has had lasting effects on the Tempe community and Arizona State University. While campus safety measures have undoubtedly improved in the decades since her death, the knowledge that her killer was never caught serves as a chilling reminder of the potential for violence. For students and faculty who were at ASU in 1997, Fiona's murder and the subsequent attacks created an atmosphere of fear and uncertainty. Even for those who came later, knowing about this unsolved crime can affect their sense of security on campus. The case has also likely influenced local law enforcement practices. The challenges faced in solving Fiona's murder, as well as the other attacks that occurred around the same time, may have led to changes in how evidence is collected and preserved, how interagency cooperation is managed, and how cold cases are approached. For the Asian American community in particular, Fiona's case, along with the later incidents targeting Asian women, highlighted specific vulnerabilities and concerns. It may have led to increased community organizing, support networks, and advocacy for culturally sensitive victim services. The broader implications. Fiona Yu's case, while unique in its specifics, is unfortunately not isolated in its broader context. It represents one of thousands of unsolved murders in the United States, each one leaving behind grieving families, unanswered questions, and the unsettling knowledge that a killer remains at large. These cold cases pose significant challenges for the criminal justice system. Resource allocation. With limited budgets and personnel, law enforcement agencies must balance their efforts between solving new crimes and investigating old ones. Technological gaps. As forensic technology advances, there's an ongoing need to revisit old evidence with new techniques. This requires not only financial resources but also training and expertise. Legal and ethical considerations. New investigative methods, particularly those involving genetic information, often outpace legislation and ethical guidelines, creating complex legal and moral dilemmas. Public trust. Unsolved high-profile cases like Fiona's can erode public confidence in law enforcement's ability to solve crimes and ensure community safety. Cold case. Backlogs. The sheer number of unsolved cases creates a daunting backlog for cold case units, making it challenging to give each case the attention it deserves. Addressing these challenges requires a multifaceted approach involving not just law enforcement, but also legislators, forensic scientists, ethicists, and the public at large. The human element. Amidst the discussion of DNA evidence, investigative techniques, and broader societal implications, it's crucial to remember the human element at the core of this case. Fiona Yu was not just a victim or a case file. She was a young woman with hopes, dreams, and a future that was brutally taken from her. Her family has lived for over 2 decades with the pain of her loss, compounded by the lack of closure that solving her murder might bring. Her friends and classmates have carried the memory of her death with them as they've moved through their own lives. The investigators who have worked on her case over the years have grappled with the frustration of an unsolved crime and the weight of responsibility to bring her killer to justice. Even for those who never knew Fiona personally, her story resonates as a reminder of the fragility of life and the enduring impact of unresolved tragedy. It underscores the importance of community, safety, and the pursuit of justice, no matter how much time has passed. The power of hope and persistence. Despite the passage of time and the many challenges faced in solving Fiona's case, there remains reason for hope. Advancements in forensic science continue to offer new possibilities for solving cold cases. The commitment of law enforcement agencies to pursuing these cases, even decades later, demonstrates a dedication to justice that transcends time. Moreover, the power of public engagement should not be underestimated. In many cold cases that have been solved in recent years, it was often a tip from the public, sparked by renewed media coverage or a fresh appeal for information, that provided the crucial breakthrough. The solving of long cold cases across the country serves as a reminder that it's never too late for justice. Families who have waited decades for answers have finally found closure. Perpetrators who thought they had escaped justice have been held accountable for their actions, sometimes after half a century or more. These success stories offer hope not just for Fiona's case, but for all unsolved crimes. They remind us of the importance of perseverance, the value of advancing technology, and the power of a community that refuses to forget. The role of advocacy and support. While the primary focus in discussing cold cases is often on solving the crime, it's important to also consider the ongoing need for support and advocacy for victims' families and survivors of violent crime. Organizations dedicated to supporting families of murder victims and advocating for cold case investigations play a crucial role. These groups often provide emotional support and counseling for families dealing with unresolved loss, assistance in navigating the criminal justice system, advocacy for allocation of resources to cold case investigations, public awareness campaigns to keep cold cases in the public eye, networking opportunities for families facing similar circumstances. For cases like Fiona's, where cultural and language barriers may be a factor, culturally specific support organizations can be particularly valuable. Baker. They can help ensure that families from minority communities have their voices heard and their needs met within the criminal justice system. The ripple effects of unsolved crimes. The impact of an unsolved murder extends far beyond the immediate circle of the victim's family and friends. It creates ripple effects that can be felt throughout a community for years or even decades. Fear and insecurity. The knowledge that a killer remains at large can create a lingering sense of fear and vulnerability in a community. Erosion of trust. Unsolved crimes can damage public trust in law enforcement and the justice system. Community cohesion. On the positive side, tragic events can sometimes bring communities closer together as they unite in grief and in the pursuit of justice. Policy changes. High-profile unsolved cases often lead to changes in law enforcement practices, campus security measures, or public safety policies. Cultural impact. Cases like Fiona's can become part of a community's shared history and identity, influencing how people think about safety, justice, and community responsibility. Understanding these broader impacts underscores the importance of continuing to pursue cold cases, not just for the sake of the immediate victims and their families, but for the well-being of the community as a whole. The future of cold case investigations. Looking ahead, the field of cold case investigation is likely to see significant changes driven by technological advancements and shifting societal attitudes. Artificial intelligence, AI and machine learning algorithms could potentially analyze vast amounts of case data, identifying patterns or connections that human investigators might miss. Advanced DNA analysis. Continued improvements in DNA technology may allow for analysis of smaller or more degraded samples, potentially yielding results in cases where previous testing was inconclusive. Digital forensics. As our lives become increasingly digital, cold case investigators may find new avenues for gathering information from old digital devices or online footprints. Crowdsourced investigations. With appropriate safeguards, leveraging the power of interested members of the public could bring new perspectives and resources to cold case investigations. Virtual and augmented reality. These technologies could potentially be used to recreate crime scenes, allowing investigators to explore different scenarios or perspectives. Ethical and legal frameworks. As new investigative techniques emerge, we can expect ongoing debates and policy development around the ethical use of these tools, particularly concerning genetic privacy and data protection. The promise of closure. For the family and friends of Fiona Yu, the promise of closure remains a powerful motivator. While solving her murder cannot undo the tragedy of her loss, it could provide answers to long-standing questions and potentially allow for a measure of healing. Closure in cold cases can take many forms: identification of the perpetrator, putting a name and face to the person responsible for the crime. Understanding of motive, learning why the crime was committed, which can sometimes help in the grieving process. Legal justice, seeing the perpetrator held accountable for their actions through the legal system. Honoring the victim's memory. Solving the case can be a way of honoring the victim, ensuring that their story is not forgotten. Community healing. resolution of a high-profile cold case can help an entire community move forward. Prevention of future crimes. In some cases, solving a cold case can prevent future crimes by taking a dangerous individual off the streets. While the path to this closure in Fiona's case remains uncertain, the continued efforts of law enforcement, advances in forensic science, and the enduring hope of those who remember her offer the possibility that one day, the full truth of what happened on that August day in 1997 will finally come to light. A call to action. As we conclude this exploration of Fiona Yu's case and its broader implications, it's important to remember that cold cases like hers are not just historical curiosities or abstract puzzles to be solved. They represent ongoing injustices, unhealed wounds in the fabric of our communities. For those moved by Fiona's story, there are ways to contribute to the pursuit of justice in her case and others like it. Share information. If you lived in the Tempe area in 1997 or have any information that might be relevant to Fiona's case, contact the Tempe Police Department, MAU. Support cold case initiatives. Consider supporting organizations that advocate for cold case investigations or provide resources for law enforcement agencies to pursue these cases. Participate in DNA databases. If you've done a consumer DNA test, consider uploading your results to databases like GED Match and opting into law enforcement matching. This can help not just in Fiona's case, but in countless other unsolved crimes. Raise awareness. Share Fiona's story and those of other unsolved cases. Keeping these cases in the public consciousness can generate new leads and maintain pressure for ongoing investigation. Advocate for resources. Support initiatives to fund cold case units and provide law enforcement agencies with the resources they need to pursue these challenging investigations. In the end, the story of Fiona Yu is not just about a single unsolved crime, It's about our collective commitment to justice, our responsibility to remember and honor victims of violence, and our shared hope that even after decades, the truth can come to light and healing can begin. As long as there are those who remember and care, there remains the possibility that one day, Fiona and her family will finally have justice.